Hi everyone, we will be doing the parts of the flower today. Now, what do you think when it comes to parts of the flower? What kind of parts have you seen? Now, I'm sure all of you all have seen flowers and have and know what kind of parts are there in a flower. Now, when it comes to parts of the flower, there's so many parts inside and out. Now, in this lesson, we will be looking at the parts of the flower inside and out both. Now, in this slide, you can see there's a picture of a flower and a set of keywords where you can use to name them. There's A, B, C, and D. Now, by looking at it, you can definitely label the parts of the flower. Now, A, obviously, you know it's labeled the petals. You can see it's the petal of the flower. Then, in here, B is labeled the stem. You can see it's the stem. Now, even when we draw a flower, what we mostly do is we draw a stem, we draw the flower, and we draw leaves. So, C, you can see it's the leaf of the flower. And lastly, what's D? We are left with the fruit and the roots. We have already labeled petal as A. We have labeled stem as B. We have labeled leaf as C. We are left with fruit and roots. So, what do you think D is? D is going to be roots. So, this was a small refreshing of your memory. We are now going to move on to your actual lesson of parts of the flower. Let's see. Now, a little bit of background information on parts of the flower. Flowers are able to reproduce. That is how we can see flowers, then flowers forming fruits, and so on. Flowers actually have male and female parts, and they are given separate names. The male part, as you can see here circled in blue color, is called the stamen, while the female part, circled in pink color, is called the carpel or the pistil. Both refer to the female parts. You have to remember that a flower only has one female part, while it could have 2 to 3 or several male parts, stamens. So when you look at a flower, you will understand that. We'll see. Then, now here you can see the parts of the flower. The petal clearly shown. Here, the pink color petals. Then in the middle, you have the stigma, the tube-like structure called the style, the ovary, and the small seeds, the small circles here are called the ovules. Then the stem that we all know, the leaves, but then in here, when you see a flower, there's small leaves under it, which is for the purpose of protection actually. They are called the sepals. They are not the leaves. The leaves are the ones you can see in the stem, but this is right below the petals. They are called the sepals. They are for the purpose of the protection of the flower. Now, on top of the stigma, this structure here, you can see a few yellow color dots. They are the pollen. Pollen. You might have seen pollen in flowers. What do you call it? Nectar. So those are like the sweet nectar of the flowers. Petals can be of various colors. You have seen flowers of different colors. There's white color, red color, yellow color. There's so many different colors. So each of these parts have their own function, which we will look into in further of this set of slides. Now, we will look at the separate female and the male parts. So as you can see here, the female part is the mid part over here. if I would show it to you like this. Now, you can see the one I'm circling here. That is the female part. So if you zoom it in, you can see here, this is the female part. What do we call it? I told earlier, we call it the carpel or the pistil. Now, the female part consists of three main parts: the ovary, the stigma, and the style. So if I were to draw it here again, you can see here, this is our stigma, the topmost part. The tube-like structure is called the style, and the bottom part is called the ovary, and the middle part, which is not drawn here, they are the seeds, or in other words, ovules. Those are the three main parts of the female part of the flower. Now, I told earlier, there's only one of these in one flower. There's not many. You can only see one of these in a flower. Let's have a look at the male part. Now, the male part is called the stamen. It also comprises of three parts. You can see here, how many male parts do you see here? There's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, and 5. As you can see, there's 5 male parts in this particular flower. But all you can see here for a female part is a single female part. So, it explains what I said earlier. Only one female part, while there can be several male parts. Now let's look at the parts of the stamen. The stamen, if you take one of these out, this is what it looks like over here. Now, you have a thin, long structure with something like this attached to the top of it. So this long, thin structure is called the filament. You call it the filament. And the top part here is called the anther. Anther. Now remember I told there's this yellow color dot-like structures on top of the stigma labeled as pollen. This pollen is actually produced from this anther. So if you see a flower and you see anthers, if you look at it, if you give it a closer look, you will notice that there's yellow color powder-like structures on it. What is it, that yellow color powder-like structure? It's the pollen. So what you have to remember is that pollen is produced by the anther. Now, let's go through the female and male parts of the flower once again. The female part is called the carpel or the pistil. It comprises of three main structures: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Inside the ovary, we have the ovules. Then, the stamen, the male part, comprises of three main structures: the filament, the long tube-like structure, the anther on top of it, and the pollen, which is produced from this anther. Now, here you can have a closer look of this ovary. The ovary is over here, and inside of it there are so many ovules, this green color structures. Okay, then moving on. Let's look at the functions of the parts of the flower. The filament, the long structure that we saw in the stamen. So this was our stamen. Attached to it was the anther, the long structure. Now the filament. The function of the filament is that it supports and holds the anther, and it is part of the stamen. The anther, the top part, it's a part of the stamen and contains the pollen. It basically produces the pollen. Now the stamen, it in general, the whole male part. It makes pollen and is made up of the anther and the filament. Now moving on to the female part. The ovary. The ovary has the eggs stored in it. What are these eggs? They are the ovules. Ovules are stored in this ovary, where it combines with the pollen in the process of reproduction and produces the fruit. Then we have the stigma of the carpel or the pistil. Stigma is the sticky part. Now remember, I drew it earlier also. We have the stigma like this. We have the tube-like structure over here. And then we have the ovary. So this top part here is called the stigma. This part over here. It is a very sticky part. Why do you think it is sticky? It is sticky in order to catch the pollen. Remember we saw the yellow colored dots earlier? That was the pollen. So it is sticky in order to catch this pollen. The style, the long tube-like structure, it is there to support the stigma. It is a tube-like structure, therefore the support of the stigma. And then, what do we have next? We have the petals of the flower. The petals of the flower, now you have seen flowers. They are never dull colored. They are always very brightly colored. They are yellow, they are red, pink, white, different bright color. So, why do you think they are very bright colored? They are bright colored in order to attract insects. Only when they attract insects, their process of reproduction happens accordingly. So, next we have the sepal. Remember I told below the petals we have a few leaves. They are the sepals. So, these sepals are there for the protection of the buds. Now we know before the flower blooms in, we have buds, the unbloomed flowers. So these are special leaves that form a ring around bottom to protect these buds. Okay, now that we are aware of the functions, let's go on. Now, with the knowledge we have this image where you are asked to name the flower parts. There's 8 parts. It's a small activity for you to do. Then, moving on. Flower dissection is an activity where you're going to cut open a real flower. A lily or a hibiscus is the most suitable flower for this activity because these types of flowers, they have very distinct parts. Like you can easily see the distinct female and male parts. So, the aim of this activity is to find all the flower parts that are shown in the diagram and what we learned so far. So, you are going to separate the parts of the flower out like you can see in this picture. You can see the petals separated. You can see the anthers separated. You can see the carpel or the pistil separated nicely on this paper. Then, next up, what you're going to do is you're going to first take your flower, pull out all the petals of the flower carefully without harming the rest of the parts. Then you're going to pull off all the stamens, which means the anthers and the filaments basically. Each stamen is made up of 2 parts. So if you recall your memory, you should know what each of those parts are. They are the filament and the anther at the top. Now, like I told earlier, the anther holds the pollen. It produces the pollen. If your flower has matured enough, you will see orange or yellow color residue, like a few powder form pollen on your paper if you keep your anther out. So when you keep it on your paper, you will see that there will be like an orange yellowish color bit of pollen on your paper. So this is our stamen structure. We have the anther on top, we have the filament at the bottom, and we have the pollen on the anther. Then what's the next step of flower dissection? The next step is that Now you took the petals out, you took the stamen out. What should be left with you should be the female part, which is the carpel or the pistil. Now, it is the female reproductive structure of the heart, which is made of 4 parts. At the top of the carpel, you will find the stigma. Then we have the style, and then we have the ovary. And inside the ovary, you will see the ovules or the egg. Now, you're going to feel the top part of the stigma. If you notice that it is sticky, like I said earlier, you will know that it is the stigma. Why? Because stigma is supposed to be sticky in order to catch the pollen from the anther. Now, follow the tube-shaped tissue, which is the style. We have the stigma on top, the sticky stigma on top, and to hold it, we have the style. Now, when you go through this, follow the tube-like structure, the style, you will see a round structure. That is our ovary. Carefully break open the ovary. You're going to dissect this ovary in the middle. What you're going to notice are the eggs or the ovules, in other words. You have to be very careful because to not damage the ovules in the process, you have to be very careful and gentle when you cut open the ovary. So if your flower is matured enough, you will see the ovules inside of this ovary. So this is an activity where you can observe the parts of the flower in real life by yourself. Okay, next up. So this is the parts of a real flower. You can see the anther, and can you see there's like, it looks very furry. It looks like it has something on it. So you can see those are the pollen. The pollen that is produced by this anther, and the long structure, long elongated structure is the filament. This is our male structure of the male reproductive structure of the flower, known as the stem. Then the pollen, you can see clearly also in this. The anther is over here. You can see yellow color residue on it. That's the pollen. In this, you can see the bright red colored petals. And then you can see here, this is the stigma. The long elongated structure is the style, the tube-like structure. Likewise. Now the sepal, remember I told it's there to protect the bud. So this is the bud you can see over here, and the function of the sepal is to protect it. Now, the stamen's main function, which is the male part, the main function is to make pollen. The carpel or the pistil, the female part, the main function is to make ovules or the egg cells. And then, now, let's look at plant reproduction. During plant reproduction, the pollen grains need to move from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. That's how it happens. So this process is called pollination. You might have heard this before as well. So pollination is basically where the pollen grains of one flower moves to the stigma of another flower. That is how plant reproduction takes place. Now, who gets these anther pollen from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower? There has to be someone to do that. That is where our insects come into place. Bees, flies, fruit flies, all those insects are the ones who pollinate flowers. Other than insects, wind also could aid in this process, where there's two processes of plant production. There's insect pollinated flowers and there's wind pollinated flowers. So both insects and wind can help with this process of pollination. Now, Insect-pollinated flowers, they have a different structure compared to wind-pollinated flowers. So, what do you think might be different about insect-pollinated flowers and wind-pollinated flowers? How do you think the structures differ? And why are their structures different? Let's see. Now, in insect-pollinated flowers and wind-pollinated flowers, they have very distinct petals. Insect-pollinated flowers, like the ones we have discussed so far, they have very large and very brightly colored petals in order to attract insects. But wind-pollinated flowers, they are very small and they are dull green or brown colored because they do not need to attract insects. They have to be very lightweight in order for them to be able to be wind pollinated. For it to be wind pollinated, they cannot be heavy, yeah? They cannot be large. Therefore, they are structured in a way that it can actually be pollinated via wind. Then, when it comes to scent and nectar, insect pollinated flowers, in order to attract insects, they are usually scented. So, we know flowers, most flowers, they have a nice smell. They are very scented. Roses, they have their own scent. Jasmine, they have their own scent. And they also contain nectar. So they are structured this way in order to once again attract insects to aid in the process of insect pollination. Wind pollinated flowers, on the other hand, they do not have a scent, nor do they comprise of nectar. Why? Because they do not need to attract insects. The number of pollen grains. In insect pollinated flowers, there's a moderate number of pollen grains because insects transfer pollen grains effectively. They land on the anther of one flower, they get it on their body, and they go into the stigma of another flower, and then they transfer those pollen grains into the stigma of that flower. But when it comes to wind pollinated flower, that's not the case. There's a lot of pollen grains because most pollen grains are not transferred to another flower. You can never guarantee that this number of pollen grains will actually be transferred to another flower. Therefore, pollen grains in a wind pollinated flower are high in number because it's uncertain. That's the reason. Now, in insect pollinated flowers, the pollen grains are usually very sticky or spiky. Why are they like that? Because to make sure that it sticks to the insect's well. So when the insect goes and land on the anther of the flower, the pollen grains should somehow stick to their legs and their body so that it gets transferred properly. But when it comes to wind pollinated flowers, there's no insects interfering. Therefore, the pollen grains have to be smooth and they must be very light in weight. They should be very light so that they can be easily carried by the wind. Now, anthers, they are usually inside the flower. In insect pollinated flowers, the anthers are usually inside the flower, what we have seen so far. But when it comes to wind pollinated flowers, the anthers are usually located outside the flower so that it's much easier for it to be carried by the wind. Then the stigma. Stigma is also in insect pollinated flowers inside the flower and they are usually very sticky so that when the insect comes and land on it, the sticky stigma would somehow catch this pollen from the falling from the bee or whichever the insect involved. Then the stigma on the wind pollinated flowers, they are usually located outside the flower and they are very feathery so that it somehow easily catches the pollen which is carried by the wind. So those are the distinct features of each of these structures when it comes to an insect pollinated flower and a wind pollinated flower. Now, these are some of the questions for you to try. Correct the false statements. First, you have to mention whether it's true or false, and then you have to correct whichever the false statements are. Now, the first one. The style is where the eggs are stored. Now, eggs are stored in the ovary. Ovary, we know when we dissected also, we were asked to dissect it carefully so that the ovules do not get damaged. So the style is not where the eggs are stored. The ovary is where the eggs are stored. Let's correct that. The style is not, it's the ovary. Number 2. The stigma catches the pollen. That is true. Why is it true? The stigma is structured in a way that it is very sticky in order to catch the pollen from the insect. Third one, the stamen makes the eggs. Now see, what's the stamen? Stamen is the male part, male structure of the flower. How can it make the eggs? It does not make the eggs. It's the carpel or the pistil that makes the eggs. So it's the carpel or the pistil that makes the eggs. Number 4. The sepal protects the bulb. That is right. The sepal is the set of specialized leaves on this on the flower right below the petals in order to protect the bulb. Then, fifth one, the filament supports and holds the anther. That's right. Our stamen looks like something similar to this. That's our filament. This is our anther. Anther is on the top. Below we have the filament. The whole purpose of the filament is to hold the anther in place. So that's true. Okay. Then, moving on. These are the corrected answers. Then we have a small activity also here. It's a crossword puzzle to find the correct answers. And yes, these are the correct answers for it. All right, that's all for today. Hope you all understood everything that was taught today. And yes, have a nice day.